Newcastle have had a horrible transfer window this summer, potentially losing out on their best player, Alexander Isak, and being rejected by multiple first choice targets. This video here today is going to analyse how Newcastle can save their transfer window. So, the main reason I wanted to make this video was because of this man here, Alexander Isak. Now, you will all be aware of what's going on at the moment. This is probably the biggest, maybe most high profile transfer saga at the moment in world football. Alexander Isak has told Newcastle that he wants to leave this summer. Obviously, this is a massive blow to Eddie Howe and Newcastle. Alexander Isak is a world class striker, scored over 20 goals last season for Newcastle, and is one of the best strikers, not just in England, but in the world right now. He's probably the best striker on the market that is gettable. At this time, so losing to Newcastle is, horrible for them. However, the price tag of Alexander Isak is an interesting one. There's been rumoured that Newcastle want at least 150 million, and that begs the question: is any player worth 150 million? And Newcastle's issues with financial fair play and PSR may mean that if they do sell Isak for 150 million, they will be able to reinvest that money in better areas of the squad and make them stronger as a whole. So we're going to analyse how maybe Newcastle can spend that 150 million if they were to get that. It's looking like Isak will head to Liverpool for around maybe 130 to 150 million, but let's assume that Isak leaves for 150 million. Go into maybe some potential targets. I just want to show you that Newcastle have had a tough start to the window. It's not just Isak showing that he wants to leave. They've also had some setbacks in the market with some of their first choice targets. One of the first ones was obviously João Pedro, who's obviously now at Chelsea. Newcastle originally did want to sign João Pedro. I think their interest has actually spanned back a couple of seasons now, and I think the goal was to actually play Isak and João Pedro together at times. Obviously, Chelsea swooped in, and you saw João Pedro. He already looked settled in at the Club World Cup, so Newcastle missed out on him. James Trafford as well. That was another long transfer saga as well, and it looked like he was almost destined to go to Newcastle from Burnley, but Man City have swooped in and have now got him back, so he will be competing with Ederson next season for the #1 spot at Manchester City. Another setback for Newcastle, who have been looking to replace Nick Pope. Instead, they've now gone and signed Aaron Ramsdale, which is an interesting signing. I think it's a loan with an obligation to buy, so that'll be interesting to see how that goes next season. Brian Mbeumo as well. This is a massive signing for Manchester United, who I thought actually would have been a perfect fit for Newcastle. We know Newcastle have been looking to try and buy a right winger for a year or two now, and I thought Mbeumo would have been the perfect slot. I am a bit surprised that he chose Man United, but you can see the size of the club, and you can see why he potentially could have turned down Newcastle like many others this summer. Hugo Ekitike, obviously Liverpool have just signed Ekitike for quite a big sum. Originally, it did look like at one point Newcastle were going to sign Ekitike. At one point, it was cited that they wanted to play Ekitike and Isak alongside each other. Obviously, Ekitike last season at Frankfurt, one of the best young strikers in Europe last season. He can score goals, he can assist goals. His link-up play is brilliant. He obviously formed that great partnership with Omar Mamouche before Mamouche left for City in January. So another big signing which Newcastle did miss out on. However, Newcastle have made one positive signing that I think can be very suitable for the way Eddie Howe likes to play football. Anthony Elanga, who obviously had an amazing season last season at Nottingham Forest under Nuno, guiding them to European football. I think this signing here is, it shows a lot of intent of how Eddie Howe wants to play football. He likes to be fast and direct. You have a look at some of the wingers he has at the moment in Anthony Gordon, Jacob Murphy, Harvey Barnes. He wants to get the ball forward quickly. And we know Elanga is obviously one of the quickest players in the Premier League. It will be interesting to see where he plays. I'm thinking it will be off the right with Gordon to the left. You can imagine if that does stay or does stick around, then some of the link-up play that Newcastle could have had there. But I think on the break next season, Newcastle will be very dangerous and in transition, especially against those teams maybe where they have less of the ball. I think we've seen last season a few games, obviously Liverpool in the cup final. You had some of those Arsenal games in the Carabao Cup semi-final, the United games where Newcastle would sometimes sit a bit deeper, but then hit you on the break with Isak and Gordon's running. So I think Elanga there is a perfect sign-in. But Obviously, as well, Newcastle have had some departures. As you can see, Callum Wilson has left the club for West Ham. He's been a great servant to the club for Newcastle, scoring goals across the last few years. He has had his problems with injuries, but again, he does maybe leave a hole in the squad for that backup striker position. And obviously, with questions over Isak as well. Newcastle could be going into the season with just William Asula, who's nowhere near ready to lead the line. Obviously, Sean Longstaff as well, a local lad, a fan's favourite, going to Leeds. He's put some brilliant performances in for Newcastle over the year, and the fans really love him. So it's a shame to see him go as well, but it does leave Newcastle with a body lighter in the midfield department as well. So we're going to be having a look at maybe some replacements for these as well within the squad. So now let's take a look into some potential targets for Eddie Howe and Newcastle this season. We're going to consider that we have around 150 million to spend. Granted that Isak does go to Liverpool. I'm going to have a look at various different parts of the squad and areas that we can improve. So the first area I would like to look at is the central midfield position. And my first target for Newcastle is actually going to be João Gomes out at Wolves. Now, João Gomes moved from the Brazilian League to Wolves a couple of seasons ago now. He's got 2 seasons of Premier League football under his belt. He actually did win Wolves' Fans Player of the Season last season. And I think he could be a really, really good, shrewd addition to this Newcastle midfield. We've got to take into account that Newcastle are obviously in the Champions League now. And obviously, last time they were in the Champions League, Newcastle did struggle with playing on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and also on a Saturday. Obviously, as well, with Eddie Howe's intense playing style, he likes his midfielders to cover a lot of ground. Now, when I look at the Newcastle starting midfield, I think everyone can name the three that will start. It will always be Joelinton, Tonali, and Bruno G. Now, that is great, but when one of those or two of those come out the side, then there's a real quality drop off in that Newcastle midfield. And for Newcastle to be able to challenge for that top four again, and potentially even more in the league title, and also challenge on all fronts in Europe, I think João Gomes could be a really, really good potential signing for them to kind of cover all three of those midfield spots. He's quite a combative midfielder. I've got his FB ref here just to the size for reference. You can see he ranks in the top 97%. For midfielders for tackles. I think he was with just next to Moises Caicedo for ball recoveries last season in the Prem. You can see his carrying numbers are decent as well. Think of him as almost like a mini Bruno Guimaraes, and he's already got 10 caps as well for Brazil. I don't think Wolves would ask for loads of money. I think maybe a deal could be down for around 30 to 40 million. And as I said, as a rotation for one of the three in midfield, I think he could easily slot in and not look out of place. I think João Gomes could be a really, really good bit of business for Newcastle. Now, moving on, we've had a look at the central midfield position, potentially replacing Sean Longstaff. I now like to have a look at a potential striker. Now, the big talk obviously is on Alexander Isak leaving. So that leaves us with a few options up front. Now, the big talk at the moment is Benjamin Sesko going to Newcastle. United are also interested there, and the player has not made his decision yet. So I'm going to ignore Sesko here and maybe assume that he chooses to go to Man United. I wanted to think of a potential striker who could replace Alexander Isak, but also score or maybe have the near amount the same impact that Isak has had in the last few seasons for Newcastle. So I think there's two different ways you can look at this. You can go down the let's win now option and get a striker in that can maybe score goals straight away. Or you can go for a striker that is maybe a bit more of a project, a bit more of a younger striker, like Sesko would be, but with the potential for him to really, pay off that money paid in the future. The first option I'm looking at is actually the first option that we choose there. Someone who's a bit older, Serhou Guirassy at Borussia Dortmund. I think would be a phenomenal option. Now, Grassi is a bagsman. He's a goal scorer. He lives and breathes goals. He's been at Brandes, Stuttgart, and now Dortmund. He was one of the top scorers in the Champions League last season for Dortmund. He scored plenty of goals in the Bundesliga across the last few seasons. He scores goals everywhere he goes. Now, I think Guirassy, he would be a player that I think would suit the Premier League. I think his physicality and his style of play would really suit Eddie Howe and the league and Newcastle as a whole. And I think he would score a lot of goals in Newcastle. Now, the price is an interesting one. At 29 years old, obviously you're not going to want to break the bank for Guirassy. I think you'd be able to get maybe 2 or 3 really good goal scoring seasons out from him, where he gives you a great output. It's a bit of a dream signing here, thinking outside the box. But I think that's what Newcastle need to do here with the strikers. A lot of the strikers have already been taken off the market. Your João Pedro, your Liam Delap's, your Hugo Ekitikis. What's wrong with Newcastle maybe signing Jurassi now and continuing that look on the market for maybe a younger profile as well, who they can share their workload with. So I'll be looking at maybe Sergio Jurassi as an option. I'll definitely be having a look at him. But moving on, now one option that Newcastle I think have been looking at for ages is a centre back to play next to Sven Botman. Now Newcastle has some good options there. You've got Fabian Schär, you've got Dan Burn, you've got Jamal Lascelles. But when you're playing in the Champions League and Premier League, I do think that is going to have to be, the quality is going to have to increase there if you want to challenge on all fronts. So I've got four centre back options here. Now, ideally, I think Newcastle should sign two centre backs. Now, whether they can or they will is yet to be seen. But I think these four options here provide some really nice options for Newcastle in their defence. As you can see on the left hand side, we've got Trevor Chalobah and Tosin Adarabioyo. Now, the reason I've included these in because I think there may be room for a deal to be done. We all know what Chelsea are like. They have so many players, and they're always looking to offload players to buy more players. Now, Chalobah and Tosin Adarabioyo, both players who maybe at times last season weren't used as much, but when they were used for Chelsea, I think they stepped in really well. Obviously, Chalobah spent the first half on loan at Crystal Palace, really impressed there. Chelsea then called him back, too much to the annoyance of Crystal Palace, but when Chalobah did step in, he was really good. And Tosin Adarabioyo as well. Didn't play as much in the Prem, but he was very impressive in the Europa Conference League. I both think they're levels of players that Newcastle could have. Not maybe to always start for them, but to come into the team and really improve that squad maybe instead of just the starting 11. Now I wouldn't sign maybe one of these two on their own, but maybe if we were to sign them, partnered with maybe the centre backs that I have on the right, which is Mark Guehi and Ousmane Diomande. Now Mark Guehi, I think Newcastle were linked to with last year. They had a bid around £60 million rejected. Mark Guehi is coming into the last year of his contract at the moment, so there is potential for Palace to get a fee instead of him leaving on a free for next year. However, we know Steve Parish at Palace are always very strict negotiators, and it does look that Steve Parish wants around 40 million plus for Mark Guehi, which could be a stumbling block. And there are other clubs linked with Guehi. Liverpool have been heavily linked. I think Tottenham are interested as well, so it could be quite a tough deal for Newcastle to get done. So instead, my option here would be Ousmane Diomande, the centre-back at Sporting Lisbon. He's a young Ivory Coast centre-half. Diomande is also very good on the ball. He had a 93.6% passing accuracy last season. He's also very good at long passes, with his average long pass completion at 62.2% last season. So he's a defender who doesn't just like to play it safe. He can really help with that build-up as well. You could think about him hitting those maybe long diagonal balls to either a Gordon or an Elanga. That could be a real threat there as well. He's been very highly rated. He was in the Liga Portugal Team of the Year last season and the season before that. And I think at Newcastle, they've been looking for a centre-back to go next to Sven Botman for a long time now. And, Diomande is a young profile. He's 21. It's looking like a deal can maybe get done for around 40 to 50 million pounds. I'd say maybe meeting in the middle at 45 million pounds. And I think it shows great value there for Newcastle to potentially, really build a young defence. They've already have obviously Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall, and having them next to Botman and Diomande with that midfield in front, I think could be a really powerful core for Newcastle to build off next season. So my recommendation would be Ousmane Diomande, and then I would probably pair that up with maybe either a Tosin or a Chalobah, potentially Tosin, as I think he would be cheaper and easier to get. Well, moving on, that's the centre backs, but another area for Newcastle is the attack. Now, obviously, the news about Isak means that potentially they're going to be looking into market for a striker. We've had a look at one option already. We'll have a look at another one in a minute. But these are potential options that can maybe come in and play across the attack here. We've got Johan Wisser at Brentford. We've got Tyler Devlin at Southampton. We've got Calvert-Lewin, who's always been heavily linked with Newcastle. And we've also got Strand Larsen at Wolves. Now, if we're going for a backup striker option to maybe rotate the minutes, then we'll be looking at maybe a potential Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who I think would suit Eddie Howe, and a potential maybe Strand Larsen. Now, I think Calvert-Lewin would be good, but for me, I don't think his goal scoring record in the last couple of years has been anywhere good enough to lead the line or play more than just a rotation role for a side like Newcastle. So I would probably tend to steer clear away from him. I think Strand Larsen's got potential as well, but I think a deal to be done with Wolves would cost quite a lot of money. Wolves have only bought him for a permanent this year, so I doubt they'd be willing to sell him so soon. So that might be a deal they want to maybe go back to in the following summer. I think these two at the top here are really interesting. We know that Newcastle have been heavily linked with Johan Wissa, and he's trying to force a move out of Brentford as well at the moment. I think Wissa's an interesting one, as you can see. He's kind of had, quite an evolution of roles under Thomas Frank at Brentford. He's played on the wing in a front three. He's played as a striker in a front two. So I think he'd be a really nice versatile option for Eddie Howe. I do think he is probably an upgrade on Jacob Murphy, as good as Murphy was last season, and probably Harvey Barnes. But they do have those wingers there as well, so it'd be the potential maybe he could rotate and take some minutes up front as well. But my option would be Tyler Diblin. Now, Tyler Diblin has, as we speak, currently been linked with Everton. I think they've just had a £35 million bid rejected. But I think Tyler Diblin has something that Newcastle currently lack. If we look at the midfielders currently in the squad, obviously Bruno G, Tonali, Joe Linton, Joe Willock, obviously we had Longstaff who's just left, Lewis Miley. They're all kind of, central midfielders. They don't really have the attack first instinct. And I think Newcastle, especially against teams where they're having a lot more of the ball and teams are sitting back, I think sometimes they can lack a bit of creativity if it's not coming from wide. And I think they need that in the centre. And I think Tyler Diblin provides someone who could really, really make a difference in Newcastle next season. Whether it's sometimes starting in that midfield three and starting as a 10, or as a right wing, or coming off the bench in the last 30 minutes of games, I think Diblin could be a really shrewd signing for Newcastle. Now, a deal will probably have to be done around 40 to 45 million pounds. I know Southampton rate him very highly and don't want to let him go for cheap, but I really think he could offer something new into that midfield. He's quite powerful as well. Just because he's young doesn't mean he's weak. I've seen him, hold big Premier League defenders and midfielders off and kind of palm them off like they were nothing. I think Eddie Howe likes that. He likes that physicality in their play. Dibley can take the ball forward. He's powerful in transition. And I think Eddie Howe would be a really good manager for Dibley to work under. I don't think he should go to a big six club straight away, like a toxic environment, like a Man United or somewhere like Spurs was last season. I think Newcastle or Everton, in fact, would be a really good move for Dibley. And I think at around 40 to 45 million pounds, I think Newcastle could do a lot worse. Finally, so my final transfer target for Newcastle to save their window is a man by the name of Mika Biref. Now, Mika Biref is a Danish striker who plays for Monaco in France. Now, Arsenal actually let go Biref last season to Monaco for around £5 million. And at the time, I don't think anyone batted an eyelid. But if anyone watched Arsenal last season, you can see how much they were struggling about a number 9. A few people look back at the decision to sell Biref as maybe one that could have come back to bite them. Now, obviously at the time, Arsenal couldn't predict what he would have gone on to be, but having a look at his first season in Ligue 1, I think it shows that Biref could be potentially one of the best strikers in the world in the future. I've added his goal record on the right hand side of the screen, just you can see here, and Biref's been around. He's obviously played for Arsenal in their youth setup and scored goals at the under 18 Premier League level, the Premier League 2 level. He's also scored a lot of goals in the Austrian Bundesliga, but he's also got goals in Ligue 1, the Scottish Premiership. He's even got a few goals in Eredivisie as well. You can see some stats here. Biref scored 13 goals and 3 assists last season in 19 games. He actually scored 3 consecutive hat-tricks at home, averaging a goal every 67 minutes. So, Biref's a really prolific striker. He's a big man as well. He can kind of run the channels. He can get the ball into his feet or in the air. And I think he'd be a really suitable signing to maybe lead the line next to 2 pacey wingers like Gordon and Elanga. Now, the fee will be interesting. Obviously, we looked at Jurassic earlier and we said that he'd be around 40 to 45 million pounds. I think if you're looking at value, Biref's a lot younger. He's 22 years old, so there's a lot more scope for development there. I think a deal could probably be done at around 40 to 50 million pounds, and I think Newcastle could potentially have, a Premier League great on their hands if they do sign Biref, and I think he'd be a really good striker who could get them a lot of goals next season, and maybe not make them miss Isak as much as they originally thought. So, in summary, here is my Newcastle transfer receipts for this summer to save their transfer window. Now, if we're looking at here, I've said I'm going to go for Micah Biref. I think that's their striker. I think he should be their replacement for Alexander Isak and should be the guy who leads Newcastle across the next few seasons in attack. We then go for Tosin, I think, is a cheap centre back option for around 10 to 15 million pounds. I don't think you can go much wrong. I think he's great rotation. He can slot into the Champions League, those Premier League games, or even just play in those domestic cup games when needed. I think he raises the level of your squad and is an improvement on Jamal Lascelles. Also going for João Gomez here, I think, like I said earlier, having that midfield option, not having too much of a quality drop off where one of the big midfield three aren't playing for 30 million, I don't think you can go wrong. Tyler Diblin as well for 40 million. I think, it is a little bit of money, but I think the talent that he's shown in a poor Southampton side last season shows that, he's a great scope to go on further and become a brilliant player in the future. And I think Newcastle could be the place to thrive. And then finally, Ousmane Diamonde for around £45 million. I think really, again, another young, aggressive centre back who can again lead this new Newcastle, this rebuilt Newcastle under Eddie Howe. So that would total probably cost around £175 million. We've got to take into account if Newcastle do sell Isak, then that will be around £25 million spent, which I don't think is bad at all. You've upgraded your attacking line there with Biref and Diblin, you've upgraded your midfield, and you've also boosted your defence as well, which I think will give Newcastle some great options to have next season. So this is how I think Eddie Howe and Newcastle will set up next season. It's nothing really new. We know that Eddie Howe and Newcastle like to set up in a 4-3-3. Hall and Livramento usually pushing far forward, the midfield three working really hard, pressing hard at the pitch to support that front three. The new signings that come into the team immediately for me are Diamonde here at right centre back and Biref here leading the line. I think they can make a real impact. We also see Ramsdale and Elanga making the team up here. I think, as you can see on the side as well, we have the subs that I've added. Having a look at where maybe they could come into the team, I think João Gomes could play anywhere across the midfield three. I think he could slot in and do the Tonali role. I also think he could slot here and take either one of Bruno's or Joelinton's spots as well. As you can see, we've got depth here as well. Shah can come in, so can Tosin as well. So I think that's better. It's an upgrade on the cells there. We also have Willock who can play across the midfield. Dan Burn coming in at fullback. I think fullback backup is probably one area that Newcastle are a bit weak at and may want to look to address. And then just looking at where Tyler Diblin can come in. Now, I think sometimes I think Diblin can play about 10 here and maybe take a Tonali out or Joelinton or whoever it may be. And I think Diblin will especially come in when teams who are sitting back, depend on no block. Newcastle got a lot of the ball and they need that spark of creativity. Whereas I think Diblin can come, he can pick the ball up deep, driving areas here, between the wingers and the strikers. He can pull it out wide. I think giving him that free run option would be quite nice under Eddie Howe. He's quite a big guy as well, and I think he can ride challenges quite well. So I don't mind playing him in the centre as well, especially if you are playing him next to two midfielders like Joelinton and Bruno G. You can almost kind of like protect him in a way. I think that could be quite a nice pairing. Also, I think Diblin can play out on the wing as well, so if we maybe take a Langer out and put maybe João Gomes into midfield. I think Diblin coming inside and maybe Livramento could hold the width as well, and I think that could be quite a nice combination there. Bruno G just maybe sitting back a little bit with Gomes. I think Diblin receiving the ball here as well would be quite nice. So that's how I see the Newcastle team setting out with my transfers. Please let me know if there were any signings that you would have considered, any recommendations on teams you'd like to see next. Please consider leaving a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.